Good morning. Okay, we're in the book of Romans, chapter 9, right? Yeah. Oh, I know. Do you all know? All right, let me get there it is. There it is. Yeah, so I use Logos, which is a Bible software product. It's probably the best one out there. There's other options if you've got a phone. If you've got the Bible app, that's technically from a church that put it on, but it's decent for what it is. It's free. Logos is not free, but they've got a lot of resources here where you can kind of have parallel books going at the same time. So I think my library, in the digital sense, is a lot larger than my physical library by a long shot. And so what I've got here is on the left-hand side, that left panel, is just the ESV. And then on the right, I have a parallel text of the ESV Study Bible. This is the digital version. If you've got the thick ESV Study Bible copy with you, I know George does, right? Pretty sure. You can't hear it? Okay, well, I know George has got one. There it is. So you have the text on top, and then you have the notes down below. That's kind of how a study Bible that's paper bound or leather bound is going to look. This is just a digital version of that. So if you're at all into technology, then this is one great option for you. So it's kind of helpful to have that. So now that we're done with Psalms from Wednesday, I'm turning that off. And there we go. Okay, so Romans chapter 9, verse 30. The previous context here is that Paul, a former, well, he's still kind of Jewish, but a former Jew when it comes to his religion, is trying to figure out how the justice of God works for those that come from Judaism versus those that come from any other kind of pagan background. And so at this particular junction, he has settled the idea that the Jews tried to achieve righteousness or goodness from their status with the law. You might. Man, I'll tell you what. I knew it. Thank you. He's the class. He's the teacher's favorite pet right there. I mean, well, life's not fair. It's the way God intended it, Through the struggle of you not having caffeine this morning, I get to be up here and talk for 45 minutes. So, okay. So, the context here is the Jews tried to attain righteousness by keeping the law. The problem with that was keeping the law does not mean or does not equate to you being righteous before a righteous God. Meaning the law was there to show you how inadequate our own righteousness or goodness is compared to the ultimate status of that, God himself. So just by keeping the law perfectly does not mean that you are right before God. That's the problem that they had to work out. And in fact, it kind of showed that there were people that were outside the law, or the Gentiles, who were acting more righteous than those that had the law of righteousness. There's a problem there. So the solution here in verse 30 is what Paul says, "What shall we say then? That Gentiles who did not pursue righteousness have attained it? That is, a righteousness that is by faith?" So here's the problem here. The Jews were trying to keep the law of Moses, but they were not trying to keep the law of Moses by faith. Now, Hebrews 11, of course, that's the main text for by faith, right? So Paul references that here. Again, we don't know who the author of the book of Hebrews is definitively, but there is a lot of good evidence that either Paul or someone taught by Paul closely could have written it, because the language that Paul uses in his epistles is very heavy in Hebrews, but again, it's anonymous. Okay, somebody read verse 31 for us.
But Israel, who pursued a law of righteousness, is not attained it.
What in the world translation are you reading
NIV,
from?
sorry.
Okay, NIV.
Get out of here.
The non-inspired version.
Well, this is the one that the church gave me when I was 18, so I'm gonna go with that.
Oh,
Yeah, blame the church.
Yeah.
I'll read verse 31.
Yeah, you got it.
All right, let's do it.
But the people of Israel who tried so hard to get right with God by keeping the law never succeeded.
What in the world translation are you
Just
reading
want to
from?
read the screen.
It's literally in front of you.
don't we have a law against that?
Is that New King James that you're reading from?
No,
What are you reading from?
I don't know.
New Living Translation. NLT.
Excuse me, but can you not figure out what I said is what that says or vice versa?
Listen, for a general reading during a general sermon, like, you can use whatever translation you want. But what we're doing here in this class is a little bit different, if you've not noticed for the last 3 years. What we're doing here is we're going verse by verse, line by line, because the words that are inspired matter. And so if you're reading it to get a sense of what the text is saying, that's fine. My mom uses New Living Translation. It's totally fine to just read it to get the sense of what's going on here. But we're diving a little bit deeper than the surface here in this class, right? Okay, so you can use whatever translation you want. Just know that there are some which are more literal to the actual syntax of the original, and there are more ones that are paraphrases. So just be aware of that. So it's not the best translation, but the ESV says, verse 31, but that Israel, who pursued a law that would lead to righteousness, did not succeed in reaching that law. So if you combine 30 and 31, what Paul is concluding then is that you've got Gentiles who are doing a better job of being righteous than the Jews who had the law of Moses, because the way that they were keeping the law was not by faith. They did not succeed in being perfect the way the law designed them to be. So, verse 32, why? Because they did not pursue it by faith, but as if it were based on works. Pause right there. End of the thought. So why did the majority of the Jews not attain righteousness by keeping the law? Because they fell into the trap that all human beings fall into when it comes to, you have to do this, you have to do that, you have to do this, you have to do that. You start checking off boxes, right? That's why the majority of the Jews, especially in Jesus' day, were called hypocrites by Jesus himself, because they were checking off their boxes, but they were missing the entire point of why those boxes were there to begin with. Woe to you, scribes, hypocrites, because yes, you tithe your cumin and your mint from your herb gardens, but you're oppressing the poor and the widow. What's more important? Tithing a tenth of your mint and your cumin, or taking care of those that are oppressed? Obviously, taking care of those that are oppressed. Is keeping the tithing commandment from the law of Moses important? Sure. It's commanded by God. But if you overlook those who are really in need, who are made in the image of God, to tithe your herb garden, we're missing the point here, right? What are the two most important commandments of the Hebrew Bible?
Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and spirit.
Yep.
Soul, and love your neighbor.
Love your neighbor as yourself. Right? So loving God, loving your neighbor, others, are important. Okay, so here is where Paul kind of lands. The second clause or sentence of verse 32, they have stumbled over the stumbling stone. Oh, what an apt name for a stone that people stumble over, the stumbling stone. as it is written, verse 33, Behold, I am laying in Zion, in Jerusalem, a stone of stumbling and a rock of offense, and whoever believes in him will not be put to shame. So we've got Isaiah 28, verse 16, which of course Paul knew, being a Jew and a Pharisee of the law. And he is quoting Isaiah, who lived approximately how many years before Jesus? Not quite 2,000. 192, not quite. Okay. 700 years. Hey, I mean, if you say $1, Bob Barker rules, I mean, you know, it's close, right? It was a long time. Okay, fair enough. It was a long time. 700 years before the time of Christ, we have Isaiah writing. He was, of course, put to death historically by the Jews because they didn't like his word. And so, sorry, Isaiah, but your book is offensive. Okay, verse 1 of chapter 10. Remember, of course, that the book, chapters and the verses were not added until like 1300 at the earliest. They weren't popular until 1500 or so AD. And so this is all one long text in front of us. And to keep it even more complicated, in the Greek, you have the uncial, which would be all capital letter Greek letters. There's no punctuation, and they're all just in a straight line across the page. So they have to read them and then figure out what the words are and then how to break it up apart, right? So, brothers, my heart's desire and prayer to God for them, who's the them? The Jews, is that they may be saved. For I bear them witness that they have a zeal for God, but not according to knowledge. Well, how does he know that? I mean, that's literally him, right? He is a zealous Jew. He's a zealot, literally. He was the one putting Christians to death. And then he says they don't know what they're talking about. And I was right among them. Verse 3, For, or because, being ignorant of the righteousness of God and seeking to establish their own, they did not submit to God's righteousness. Okay. Being ignorant of the righteousness of God. How do you think about that? What does that mean? Didn't know how it works. Okay. Melanie?
Well, it's like when we talk about we can never be good enough, we can never be righteous enough. The point is God's doing it for us. He's offered it, he's done it,
Mhm.
we just have to accept it.
Okay.
Because they were hung up on the checklist.
Yeah.
They were depending on themselves to obtain righteousness.
Right. So the first one, this first clause leads into the second one. Here's the problem of why they were ignorant of the righteousness of God, seeking to establish their own. Right? That's the problem. Is they're saying if we just try hard to keep the law perfectly, then that means that God must accept us. That's the problem. Because we're trying to compare ourselves to our Creator and say we can get there if we just try really, really hard. That's the problem. Last clause, they did not submit to God's righteousness, and here's what that means. Because, verse 4, for Christ is the end of the law for righteousness to everyone who believes. If you reject the Christ, the Messiah, God's righteousness in human form, then you're not submitting to God's righteousness. Because they rejected the Messiah, they're rejecting God himself. Right? Okay. Questions, comments, thoughts about that context? We're almost at the end of the mountain where you get to sled all the way back down. Almost there. And we've been building this whole time. I mean, Paul is a master writer here, because he has been building upon building upon building upon building on the context to lead us all the way to the top of God's righteousness, and then showing us how you live in God's righteousness. Okay, almost done. Verse 5. So we're all, again, building. For Moses writes about the righteousness that is based on the law, that the person who does the commandments shall live by them. Okay? If you want to be a righteous, might be more apt to say moral person, keep the law of Moses. And specifically here in this context, 10 Commandments. But the righteousness based on faith says, do not say in your heart, who will ascend into heaven? That is, to bring Christ down. Or, who will descend into the abyss? That is, to bring Christ up from the dead. So where's these two quotes from? What book of the Old Testament? Anyone in my Wednesday night class can answer. What's that? No, not quite. It kind of has a poetry feeling, doesn't it? Psalms. Yeah, Psalms. Of course. All right. What's the most quoted Old Testament book of the New Testament, Don? Psalms. Hey, how'd you know that? So Psalms, right? So the question is, who will ascend to heaven to talk to God face to face? Well, nobody. Who will descend into the pit or the grave, Sheol, the abyss? Nobody. Verse 8, but what does it say? The word is near you, in your mouth and in your heart. That is the word of faith that we proclaim, Paul says. Because, and then here's a verse, if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. All right. As I've said 1,000 times before, when you read the book of Romans, what do you bring with you? All your baggage. Romans is great at putting a spotlight on what you're bringing to the text. Now, if you've been with us from the beginning, the idea of salvation has been talked about, being declared righteous before God based on not our own works, but on the righteousness of Jesus the Christ. It's verse 9 how someone is saved. If you look at verse 9, does this tell you how you're saved?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, it does. Is it the only thing we've read thus far that shows you how to be saved? Not at all, right? We were in Romans 6 not too long ago. Remember that whole thing? It seemed like the idea of being born again, to go into the image of Christ's death, burial, and resurrection and water baptism, that seems to be there too. It's not mentioned here in this context specifically. Why? We already talked about it. It's already been established. We're building on that foundation to get to where we are. What's the problem for the Jews in this context not achieving salvation? Because they can't do verse 9. Why would you do chapter 6 if you can't do chapter 10, verse 9? If you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord, they wouldn't do that. They rejected Jesus. And you believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, they weren't doing that because they're trying to deny his resurrection, you will be saved. If you're able to believe and confess, then you will continue to follow the progression, the pattern, if you will, to achieve salvation. That's the context here in chapter 10. Right? Okay.
Because they can't complete the first steps.
Yeah, so people ask us why, well, if water baptism is so essential to salvation, why is it not here in this context? Because they wouldn't even do this. If they can't confess Christ as Lord and they can't believe that he's been resurrected, There's no need for a conversation about water baptism here in chapter 10. It's already been discussed in chapter 6. But they wouldn't get here, so why would you keep talking about that in that context? For me, I have a couple of illustrations that I like to use because they work for my brain. They may not work for yours, so I'll give you that warning before I start. So in Gloucester County, Virginia, it's the country. It's not the mountains, but it's the country. Like, we got a Walmart and we got a movie theater, and that was it. Now they got a Chick-fil-A and a Starbucks, so I guess we're big time now, back in Gloucester County. No Target yet, so we're still on the up and coming up, right? But they got Chick-fil-A, so we're all good. But in Gloucester County, Virginia, for me to get to my house, it's technically in a place called Hayes, little town. The sub-town that I lived in growing up was called Ordinary, Virginia, which is just, anyone who lives in Ordinary ain't. I'll tell you that right now. So we were in Hayes, and you have to go up Low Ground Road and then get on US 17, which is the new 17. It's got 4 lanes, big time stuff. US 17, and you go north. You go north, you get past Main Street, which is the old courthouse area. You have to keep going for one red light, and then you turn right, and that's my high school. 2,000 kids from 9th grade to 12th grade. So only high school in the whole county, right? So if I'm going from my house to the high school, which I did for a good bit when I was there, and I'm asking for directions along the way, if I'm leaving my house, what's the first step? Well, get on 17 north. Okay, that's step 1. Take a right, go north. And then you're going 60, 65, something like that. It's 55 miles an hour, but you're going that direction, right? You get past the Walmart, you keep going to the courthouse. You pass the courthouse, then you go to the next red light, and you take a right, and then you go to the high school. That's how simple it was to get to high school every day. So if you're starting out from my house, what's the first step? You get on 17, you go north, right? How fast do you go? You go 55. You don't see any. Yes, that's right. So you go 55. Let's say you get past that point. What's the next marker? You go to Walmart, because everybody has to go to Walmart. That's the rules in Gloucester County. You go to Walmart, right? So if I'm at Walmart and I say, how do you get to the high school, what are they going to say? Well, no. There's a whole step in the beginning here of me getting on 17 North. I don't need it. I've already done it. I'm on 17 North, passing the Walmart. What's next? Courthouse. Okay, if I'm at the courthouse, I say, how do I get to Gloucester High School? What are they going to say? Go to the next red light, take a right? Because we're already at that step. I say all of that to say that where you are on the journey to the high school, which is where nobody wants to go if you're 16, 17, 18, if you're trying to get to the high school, where you are in the process tells you what the next step's going to be. So in chapter 6, he's just reminding them of the steps they already took and what that meant for them spiritually. Here in chapter 10, they haven't left the house yet, right? We're not talking about past the Walmart, next red light, take a right, because we're not there yet. We haven't even got on 17 North. You see what I'm saying? So I can understand that because, of course, that's how my brain works. And if someone is confused about, well, this verse just simply says that confession of Christ is Lord and belief in your heart, you will be saved. Well, yeah, of course it will. But you got to start there. If you can't have that yet, if you don't have that yet, you're not on 17 North yet. So why worry about Walmart and the courthouse and the next red light? We're not there yet. That's where Paul is leading the conversation in chapter 10 versus chapter 6. So I say all of that to hopefully help you if you've not been there before. When you're having conversation with people that are taught the doctrine of faith alone, asking Christ into your heart to save you from your sin, sinner's prayer kind of stuff, and they use this as a proof text, now you know the context determines how you interpret that verse. Right? Okay, that's all that. And then here's the continuation of Paul's original thought. 4, verse 10, with the heart one believes and is justified, and with the mouth one confesses and is saved. Is belief essential to salvation? Oh, yes, okay. Okay, easy one, right? Yeah. If you don't believe it, it's hard to, get to heaven through Jesus if you don't believe in him. It's a hard thing to do. Is confession essential? Absolutely. Are they sufficient in and of themselves? No, because we got a problem there theologically. Do the demons believe that Jesus is Lord? Sure do. We've got a couple experiences here from the life of Jesus that they know who he is when the people had no idea. And he says, let them get there by themselves. Keep quiet, right? Do they confess that he's Lord? They literally say it to him while he's on the earth. So yeah, if that's enough in and of themselves, self-sufficiently to have salvation, the demons are Christians. We got a problem there theologically, right? Okay. And then here's the proof text of that, verse 11. For the Scripture says, by the way, just one small thing. This is where the star goes across the screen, the more you know. Does anyone get that reference, or am I just a 90s kid that see on TV all the time? All right. I don't know what they were trying to teach me on TV when I was a kid, but sometimes they just tell you something, and then the little star would shoot across the screen. The more you know. Like, what was the point of that? Random facts? Well, the more you know. What's the word Scripture mean? Yeah, literally it means that which is written. Okay, so if you're a scribe, you're writing something, right? So the idea is here, the Scripture, that which has been written, says, everyone who believes in him will not be put to shame. And then here's Paul's words, because there is no distinction between Jew and Greek. Now, it's a funny way to say that, because who's the empire in charge at this time? Rome. So he calls them all Greek. Why is he calling them all Greek? Everybody but George, too.
Everybody that's not Jewish is kind of a heathen or not God believing.
Yeah, kind of. It's kind of like Jewish and everything else, right?
Yeah.
Not Jewish, everything else. During this time, you have Hellenization going on. So you've got Alexander the Great, which is the leader of the Hellenistic Empire before Rome got in charge. And he went around and he made a bunch of cities that had his name attached to it because he's the greatest, don't you know? And one of the big things he was doing was enforcing education in these cities, teaching kids how to read and write, which is great. They were learning how to exercise, to call it that. It's more like combat, but who knows? And they were going to places of education to learn to be able to live in this society, this metropolis, and to be a good citizen, essentially. And so, yeah, the Romans are in charge, but the Greeks really started this process of education. So Jew and Greek, everybody else, for the same Lord is Lord of all, bestowing his riches on all who call on him. Here's a quotation, for everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. So everyone who calls, not just Jewish people, but Gentiles as well. How then will they call on him, Jesus, in whom they have not believed? If you don't believe in him being the Messiah, you can't call on him, quote unquote. And how are they to believe in him of whom they have never heard? And how are they to hear without someone teaching, preaching? Heralding out the message is the word here literally. And how are they to preach unless they are sent? As it is written, how beautiful are the feet of those who preach, herald out the good news. which is literally the word gospel there in the Greek. Okay. I'll pause for comments. Yep.
That little bit of phraseology there kind of goes back to, you get to the high school, it's like, well, if you're at the high school, you have to go here first, and you have to have this first, and get on this highway. It's like going backwards.
Yeah.
It's like, what you have to do, you say, well, you start here, you start
Yeah.
preaching, stuff like that.
Well, you got to go to the red light.
Yeah.
But you can't do the red light until you pass Walmart.
And then you get- Yeah,
You can't get to Walmart without getting on US 17,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
So the Chevy S10 won't start. You can't get to high school in the first place.
It's like trying to learn how to run before you know how to walk.
Yeah.
And you don't know how to crawl, or you just try to pull up on something to learn how to walk.
Yeah. It's not that complicated, but we as human beings love to make it really complicated. You know? If we would just submit to reading it in the context in which Paul designed it, then it's hard to get lost, literally and figuratively. But you gotta track with him all the way through. So, okay. But, verse 16, they have not all obeyed the gospel. Well, no doubt. That's been the entire last 2 chapters. For Isaiah says, Lord, who has believed what he has heard from us? Oh, man. Isaiah, poor dude. If you begin reading Isaiah, you get to a portion where Isaiah is called to go tell the people the message from Yahweh God. And he goes, all right, when do I know when I'm done doing this? He's like, well, when you die. Okay, great. How many people are going to respond to the message that you give me? Like, am I going to make a difference here? He goes, not a single person's going to hear you and obey it. Well, great. Poor Isaiah. That's the whole point here, is like he is doing a job and no one's listening, no one respects him, no one responds, and what Paul is saying is that mission continues. Lord, who has believed what he has heard from us? Not everybody. Okay, so verse 17, faith comes from hearing, which hearing is not just the audible idea of hearing, it's the idea of hearing and responding to it, and hearing through the word of Christ. Okay. Questions, comments, thoughts? Katrina.
That same scripture reminded me of when Noah was going around telling everybody that it's unrain.
Yeah.
So it's not like they didn't hear.
Yeah.
You know, same with Isaiah, same with what's going on right now. You know, because when the time comes in our age, people are going to still be doing. It's going to be like the days of Noah.
Yep.
Still going to marry, still going to be doing the same thing. And it's, when he comes, you missed it, you missed it.
I had a dream last night. I was officiating a wedding here. I've done it before. It was just marrying, giving in marriage, not kind of, yeah. Dreamt that last night. So if somebody's getting married, let me know, you know. I'm available. Okay. Not to marry. Just to do the marriage ceremony. Okay, verse 18. But I ask, have they not heard? Shouldn't they know better? Indeed they have, for, here's a quotation, their voice has gone out to all the earth, and their words to the end of the world. So should they be anticipating the message from the Messiah? Yeah. But I ask, did Israel not understand? First, Moses says, I will make you jealous of those who are not a nation, and a foolish nation I will make you angry. Then Isaiah is so bold as to say, I have been found by those who did not seek me. I have shown myself to those who did not ask for me. But of Israel, he says, all day long I have held out my hands to a disobedient and contrary people. Again, the point here is that you have the people from Israel who should have been the ones to receive Jesus as the Messiah. They knew what to look out for. They had the whole map tracked out of what the Messiah was. He came, they rejected him, killed him, and then he was resurrected, right? And then you've got the Gentiles who don't have the law, and they are eagerly anticipating and receiving Jesus and becoming Christians. So there's a kind of dichotomy here where the people who should have accepted him rejected him, and the people who didn't even know they needed Jesus are taking him, right? So kind of a odd thing going on. Chapter 11, verse 1, I ask then. Yeah.
Wasn't the Messiah they were looking for.
Yeah. We'll get to it in a couple of minutes, but our sermon today is going to be from John, and I want to end at a verse, and there are 2 more verses beyond it. I'm not going to read, so I'll give you the hint. As we're doing our textual reading for our sermon today, read the next 2 verses and see what happens. So there's the multiplication of the fish and the bread loaf to the 5,000 men who were there, plus, because there's women and children present, no doubt. And then keep reading what they wanted to do after he's done doing that. Because it's just, they thought they knew what the Messiah was all about, what his purpose was, what his intentions was, and they were ready to accept him and promote him and force him to be their king. And that was not what he came to do, not in that way. So just keep that in mind in a couple of minutes here when we start looking into our scripture. Okay, I want to pause here for chapter 11, verse 1. We continue on through this train of thought about the idea of the Jews not accepting Jesus, but then them in a general sense, accepting Christ as Lord before the end times. That's a conversation we can have. And then we have, well, what about the Gentiles then? Are they lost? Well, we'll talk about that. And then that will carry out our conversation until we get to chapter 12. Chapter 12 is where we start sliding down Mount Everest and saying, now that we know how we got righteous before God, how do we use that? How do we live that way? That's the application, right? There's going to be a couple of things also kind of towards the end when you're talking about the application of being the righteousness of God in Christ, living in that kind of way, that are issues within the church between people that are dealing with issues that are not matters of salvation. We've talked about this briefly before. Romans is where we kind of see it applicable, and we will have that full conversation when we get to it in this chapter. Okay? So we're almost through the theology and almost into the application of Romans. Thank you guys so much. We'll pick up here in chapter 11, verse 1, Lord willing, next week.